I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. I hope everyone's having a good week, and before we get to this week's story, let's go to the true crime section of the New York Post. 2 NYPD cops groped a prostitute and stole her cash after responding to a 311 call at a notorious Queens prostitution den nicknamed the Market of Sweethearts, prosecutors said on Monday. Officers Justin McMillan, 27 years old, and Justin Colon, 24 years old, allegedly stormed a Jackson Heights apartment in July 2024 and caught a sex worker and a John in the act before McMillan snatched money from her purse, grabbed her breast, and rubbed her rear end, according to Queens prosecutors. In precinct without filling in any paperwork or reporting the incident. Both officers face 15 years in prison if convicted of the top charge. You know, I get that their body cams weren't turned on. So the first thing you say is, well, what are they hiding? You know, it is quite possible that this den of iniquity, this cat house, was a real pain in the ass, and they had enough, and they're getting complaints on their post, and they went in there and told everybody, get the frig out, you put your pants on, you get the hell out of here. And maybe they were a little verbally abusive and told them to get out. And now, you know, maybe they were really giving this place a hard time. And they turned around and they said, you know how we'll get these cops off our back? We'll allege that, you know, sexual abuse and they stole money. So I want to give these 2 rookie cops the benefit of the doubt, and it did happen almost 10 months ago, so who knows? I know the Queens DA's office was better than the Bronx and Brooklyn as far as giving cops the benefit of the doubt, but let's see if there's any video footage of that, but I think they would have said, so who knows what's going on. But if the cops did it, then yeah, they should lose their jobs. But if they didn't, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, this is kind of funny. Former talk show host Maury Povich, 86 years old, revealed that he and his wife Connie Chung, 78 years old, get naughty at the end of every week. Povich and Chung, who have been married since 1980, spilled intimate details of their sex life on the first episode of his podcast, On Par with Maury Povich. So I got a story about Maury Povich and Connie Chung. I've never met them. Okay, so I retired from the NYPD in July of 2000. I'm down at the Jersey Shore, and a childhood friend and retired NYPD member who's actually gotten himself a really good job working private security. He was always doing, he was hired a year before me, and he retired a year before me, and by the time I got out, he was already in corporate security. So we were pretty good friends, and he reaches out to me one day. I'm down at the shore, and he goes, hey, I hear you retired. I said, yeah. He says, would you be interested in a job at the end of the summer? And I says, yeah, I'm listening. What do you got? And he says, you'd be like a limousine driver for this wealthy couple in New Jersey. He says, you know, you'd have a car, a take-home car, but you're basically at their beck and call. He was explaining it to me how many hours it would be, but if I worked X amount of hours over, it would be overtime. It really sounded interesting, but it sounded like, you know, I was at their beck and call. And I says, well, who is it? And he said, Maury Povich and Connie Chung. And I said to myself, there is no way I'm going to do this. First of all, I think you guys, if you've been watching my podcast, you probably know I'm not customer service friendly. I probably would say the wrong thing. And I didn't want to cause my buddy any grief that, you know, I took the job and then I didn't like the job. So I politely bowed out. But I kind of thought that was funny when I saw Maury Povich and Connie Chung had their own podcast, which, you know, good for them. But my buddy, like I said, has done quite well for himself doing private security. A phony Queens doctor left one of his patients brain dead after a botched attempt to remove her butt implants inside his illegal home clinic. The 31-year-old woman visited Felipe Hoyos Ferranda, licensed liposuction clinic in Astoria, to have her butt plants removed around 1 p.m. on Friday. Well, during the bungled procedure, Hoyos Ferranda, who claimed he was a doctor in Colombia, administered lidocaine to the victim through a syringe, causing her to go into cardiac arrest. The victim was rushed by EMS to Mount Sinai Hospital. The victim was rushed by EMS to Mount Sinai Hospital in Queens, where she was listed in critical condition. Meanwhile, Hoyos Ferranda got in his car and took off. I saw a photo of this place. It's a house. It looks like a 2-family house in Queens. I mean, there's not even a sign that says doctor. I mean, probably she's an illegal alien. I can't see anybody from this country or this world going to a house that doesn't say doctor on it. I mean, Jesus, before I go to the doctor, I look up everything, his reviews and everything. I don't know. He must have screwed up the first butt procedure, and now he's trying to take that out. And what a mess. I mean, people go to these quacks. A Florida couple was busted having sex on top of a grave in a historic cemetery, allegedly leaving meth on the passenger seat of their nearby car. Joseph Luke Brown and Stephanie K. Wegman, 3 names, of Webster, Florida, were caught getting frisky on unknown grave 43 at the Wild Cow Prairie Cemetery in Bushnell, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. The Boneyard Bootknockers left a Nissan owned by Wegman near the front of the Lock Cemetery, which has dozens of graves dating back to 1850, then headed back to get busy, police said. After breaking up the couple's ghoulish roll in the hay, the officer allegedly found methamphetamine, Xanax, oxycodone stashed inside the car. What a couple of losers. I mean, it's bad enough they're drug addicts. I get that. But you're going to go to a cemetery to screw? I mean, who thinks of these things? I mean, there's wild animals, not really afraid of ghosts and spirits and stuff, but wild animals or kids screwing around. Now, this story is really sad. Hackman's longtime publicist has revealed that the Hollywood legend and his wife did everything they could to avoid the spotlight toward the end of their lives. The 2-time Oscar winner, 95 years old, and his wife were found dead at their Santa Fe, New Mexico home on February 26. Hackman's publicist, Susan Madore, said the couple went to great lengths to maintain their privacy in recent years, explaining Hackman once purchased a plot of land next to a garbage dump because he wanted a quiet place to ride his bicycle. The publicist revealed that CBS requested to do an interview with Hackman months before his death. However, the actor had no interest in chatting about his life. CBS was going to do a piece on it anyway, and his wife begged him not to do the segment. It's really sad. I mean, I know somebody that, well, let's put it this way. I've spoke about this before. One of my favorite movies was The French Connection. That's why I became a cop. I always liked Gene Hackman. I mean, the list, you can go on and on and on with his body of work in every movie he's ever been in. He's a great actor. I know somebody that knows Gene Hackman. I've never met Gene Hackman. I've never communicated with him, but I know somebody that knows Gene Hackman. And he told me actually this summer that he wasn't doing too well mentally, that it was quite possible he had dementia. And there were a couple of photos over the years of him in New Mexico in his white pickup truck in gas stations, and he kind of looked out of it. So it's really sad that somebody like this, had to die this way. What it looks like is the wife had hantavirus, which is a rare disease that's it's caused by rodent droppings or rodent urine when it gets dry and it goes airborne and it gets into your lungs. It's a respiratory virus, and it looks like she died first. He's 95 years old. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's confused. Doesn't know to call the police, probably didn't even recognize her. Dementia, unfortunately, runs in both sides of my family, so I've seen it. I've had my aunts and grandparents die of it. I do everything I can right now. Hopefully, I don't get it. But it's a scary disease, and, the poor guy, and he was basically, I mean, even before he came down with Alzheimer's or dementia. I mean, he was a prisoner. I mean, he really wanted to live a quiet life in New Mexico, and there were the paparazzi every now and then would follow him around. And it's sad that he had to purchase extra land to ride his bicycle so no one would break his balls. I guess that's the price of fame, and I hope I never get that famous. So speaking of Gene Hackman and the French Connection, I'll share this with you guys now because I'm not going to go through with it. But I came up with the idea for my podcast. I wanted to have an opening music score and a closing music score to the podcast. And I thought, what better soundtrack than the French Connection? So if you go on YouTube, you can look up the 2 pieces of music. One is the beginning theme song of the French Connection by Don Ellis, and the end is, and then what I wanted to close out the podcast was the last scene of the French Connection, the music where Frog 1 disappears out in Randall's Island, and it's like very eerie music. And I thought that would be great. And I know if you put music on YouTube and you don't have the license to use the music, you won't get monetized, or sometimes they'll even just delete your episode. So I got to tell you, it took me almost a year to find out who owned the music rights to the soundtrack of this music, and then reach out to them. And what a process it was. So first, I reached out to the late Don Ellis's family, and I communicated with his son through email, who couldn't have been nicer. And he says, well, we don't own the music rights anymore. That was sold decades ago, but we don't have a problem with it, but we don't know who owns it. So through all these websites and search engines, finally, after a year, I found out It was Warner Chappell Music. So you send them an email and they get back to you and they send you a form and you fill out everything. Which pieces of music do you want to use? How many subscribers do you have? How long a portion of the music? So I asked for 30 seconds of each, the beginning 30 seconds of each. Then they don't tell you price. You have to make a bid or an offer. They don't tell you at all like it's going to cost $500 for the year or $200 for the year. So I said, okay. So I figured, what's it going to be worth my while to use these two pieces of music? So I took a shot in the dark and I said, for the two pieces of music, I'm willing to pay $250 a year because I thought it would help the podcast. So about a week later, I got my response and it was, we're sorry, but that's below our minimum required bid. And I'm saying to myself, well, why can't you just tell me? So I wrote back and I says, well, what's it going to take? And of course, they haven't gotten back to me, and it's probably going to be something ridiculous, and I'm not going to use it. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, that I thought it would be cool to have on the podcast, but I'm not going to spend all sorts of crazy money to have theme music, although it would have been cool. So I got a couple of stories this week. I was thinking, I don't know what made me think of it the other day, but those of you who worked in the Bronx back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, Bronx Central Booking and Bronx Court was open 24 hours a day. So that meant if you made an arrest, you would drop your prisoner off down at Bronx Central Booking, you would go into pre-arraignment, you would hand in your folder, and you'd wait in this giant waiting room with cops from all over the Bronx that were waiting to speak to a district attorney to file charges. And you could wait there sometimes 2-3 days. But the reason they did that was arraignment upstairs, where the bad guys see the judge, was open all 24/7. So there was a cast of characters in there. There was always the same 60 or 70% of the same cops from the same precincts making collars. And for me, it was like college because I was learning. There was car guys there. I would pick their brain. There was guys that were always coming in with guns. I would pick their brain. There was always cops figuring something out. So while I was waiting for the district attorney to call me, you would see the attorneys from time to time. And, it's late at night. And you'd see these attorneys come in their, rumpled suits. Rarely did you see like Barry Slotnick come into Bronx Court at 2:00 in the morning in a $500 suit. It was the guys that walked around with their vaudeville hooks around pre-arraignment. And there was this old-time attorney. He was a Jewish guy. Name was Aaron. Portly guy, had a bushy mustache. He kind of looked like Wilford Brimley from the Quaker Oats or the Firm. He would hang around arraignment, and he would represent anybody that got arrested for a small quantity of marijuana. That's all he did. And what he would do is he would hang around. He would look at the folders. He'd go, oh, marijuana, marijuana. He'd write down all the names. And then he would talk to the clerk and say, ask this guy if he wants me to represent him. And he would plea everything out. So basically, he would charge like $50 to each defendant that came out. Because with marijuana back then, I think it was under an ounce or 2 ounces, they would go, how do you plea? And if you pled guilty, it was a $50 fine or a $100 fine right on the spot. So what Aaron would do is he would represent all these weed guys, which they could have represented themselves, but for $50, he would plead them guilty. And he would he'd call it a day. And he would do this all day, all night long. But most of the time, he was a night guy. Then he had a son-in-law. His daughter was an attorney. I never saw her, but his son-in-law was an attorney. And his son-in-law drove a Porsche. And I think his license plate, he had a personalized license plate. I'm not sure if it was weed or it was something. He had a personalized license plate that kind of told you there was something going on with marijuana. And the guy looked like, if you guys remember Saturday Night Live in the 80s, Phil Hartman had a character called Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, where he had kind of like the mullet and like the Cro-Magnon forehead. And he would like, your ways frighten and confuse me. He was supposed to be a caveman that was thought out, and he became an attorney. Well, this guy looked like Key Rock, Phil Hartman's character. And he did the same shit with pleading guys out for weed. So a district attorney told me a funny story about Aaron. So one day he's down in arraignment, and some guy had an ounce or two, and the judge said, how does he plea? And Aaron goes, Your Honor, he's going to plead guilty. And the guy goes, I'm not pleading guilty. Those cops didn't find that weed legally. And Aaron had a shit fit like, we had a deal. You don't want to. And the judge goes, all right, Aaron, well, your next court date. And he's like, Your Honor, I can't take this case. And I don't know if the judge let someone else represent the guy, but Aaron threw a shit fit because he didn't want to come back or do any paperwork or file anything. He was just in and out Aaron. So that's just some of the characters you would come across down in Bronx Central Book. And I got to think about if there were more attorneys like that. But anyway, last week I did a story on the Duster, and I brought up there was another guy in auto crime that we used to call Tik Tok that didn't get along with the Duster, and they were a lot alike, although the Duster was a hell of a lot smarter. I mean, Tik Tok was a hell of a lot smarter than the Duster. So anyway, when I get to auto crime, there's this guy, and they used to call him Tik Tok, and he was an idiot savant like the Duster, but he was more worldly. And if you looked at the guy, you thought he worked in a Jiffy Lube. He just always casual. I mean, just sloppy clothes. But he would sit there. He liked doing nights, like doing 4 to 12s in auto crime, which was rare. And he would sit there doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. And he'd have Jeopardy on at the same time. And he'd be answering the Jeopardy questions, and he would bang out a New York Times crossword puzzle in under a half hour. So the guy was no dummy. So I first get to auto crime. I seen him a couple of times when I was a cop in a precinct and I would call auto crime. He came over a couple of times to ID a car. And unlike a lot of them that used to blow me off or not want to show me where hidden VIN numbers were, he was actually kind of helpful. So one day he says, hey, Ferrari, you doing anything? I said, no. He says, take a ride with me. So we get in the car, and we're in the Bronx, and the next thing I know, we're heading out to Brooklyn. And he's not really saying where he's going, and I'm of the opinion, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, and I'm not saying anything. And we wind up out in Red Hook by the piers, and, you know, we have all these import-export places, and we're driving around, and it almost seemed to me like he didn't want to be followed. It was just, he looked like he was, you know, doing counter-surveillance techniques. So we pull up in front of one of these import-export places, and he goes, would you mind just waiting out here? I'm like, what am I going to say? I says, no, okay. So he goes inside, and I'm like, what the frick am I doing out here? Like, I don't even think we took a radio. And he comes back out with a bag, and he gets in the car, and we drive out the same way we came in, serpentining through this place. And he pulls over to the side, and he starts rummaging through the bag, and I'm like, what the hell did this guy just pick up? And he pulls out a box. He goes, cigars. And he bought these Dominican cigars. And he was a generous guy. Like, I didn't smoke. And he's like, oh, I've been waiting on these things. He says, you know, the more hands these things touch, the more expensive they are. I know the guy, and I get these cigars. I'm like, shit, I wish this guy would have just said something to me instead of scaring the shit out of me. So he hands me like 3 cigars. And I go, no. I says, listen, it would be a waste for me to accept these things. I said, I don't like cigars. I don't like their taste, but I appreciate it. So he was a really nice guy. But the thing about him was, like the Duster, he wasn't from this world. And he had the worst diet of any human being I've ever met in my life. I never saw him eat anything but pizza and Jamaican beef patties. He drank coffee all day, all night long, like water. He had to drink 10, 12 cups of coffee a day. One of the guys in the office said he was made of sulfites. So anyway, one day, again, we come in a 4 to 12, and he's sitting at his desk, and he's kind of hunched over, and he's like, oh, my stomach. And I'm like, where's the pain? And he's like, right here, and he's holding his stomach. A couple of the detectives were looking at each other like, let's get him to the hospital. So we throw him in the back of an unmarked car, and we drive him up to a hospital, and we bring him into the emergency room, and, you know, a little while later, the nurse comes in. She starts asking him questions. Then the doctor comes in, and I'll never forget this. The doctor goes, when was the last time you had a bowel movement? And he looks up like it's a Jeopardy question on the TV, and he goes, oh, at least a week. The doctor goes, a week? So they took him in the back, and I don't know if they gave him an enema, suppositories, Roto-Rooter, whatever they did with him. They gave him something. He was backed up for a week, and he was fine. He did not get along with the Duster, and they would argue, and they would bet each other, and if one lost a bet, they'd fist fights, and this guy was built like a brick shithouse. He kind of had hillbilly strength. His family owned a bar up in the 4-7 at one time, and he had 2 older brothers, and my friend who used to go to that bar said they were like the Hanson brothers in the movie Slapshot. Like, they were always beating the shit out of each other, and patrons, and the father had it like, he was, I guess, the more violent of the brothers. He had to kind of get him out of there, and then he became a member of the New York City Police Department. So the reason they called him Tik Tok was you never knew what would set him off. If you were nice to him him and you'd never have a problem. But if he thought you were trying to make fun of him or screwing around with him, he would get pissed. And if he had a hard on for someone and he was talking about this person, the person didn't even have to be there. If he was telling you a story about someone he didn't like, he'd be staring at you like you were the person that he hated, and he would throw his finger up in the air and go, "That mother scratcher." Now, that's not what he said, but I don't want to get dinged on YouTube for using the real word. So next door to the auto crime division was Vice. And we had a good relationship with them. I mean, every now and then one guy wouldn't get along with someone over there, but we got along well with Vice. Well, Vice had an old timer, and Tik Tok was an old timer. Vice had an old timer. And this guy, he was a trip. He was like an old man. He was probably pushing 60, 20-something years ago. He was a white guy, but he dressed like a Cuban cigar roller. He would always wear those untucked dentist shirts, what they call guayaberas, and he would wear white pants, and he had white hair. I don't want to say his name, but he had the loudest voice. It was like a Saturday Night Live skit. Like, you'd hear him on the phone, and he would always say his name loud. He would go, "Jones, Tom Jones," like very loud. Like, if you were in auto crime, you knew he was working through 2 locked doors. That's how loud this guy was. Tik Tok used to enjoy his cigar in our office, and no one complained. We didn't have a lieutenant yet up there. It was a couple of sergeants, and I didn't like cigar smoke, but I wasn't going to say anything. And he would open the window. But anyway, Tik Tok would smoke a cigar once a day. So one time, let's just call him Tom Jones from Vice with the loud voice. He walks in and he goes, "No, oh no. Who's smoking cigars?" So Tik Tok goes, "What's your problem?" And he goes, "I'm coming in here to use your copy machine. I don't appreciate it." And he goes, "Well, get out." So they get into a pissing match. So what Tom Jones does is he tells our lieutenant and he tells one of the sergeants. So one of our sergeants tells Tik Tok, "You can't smoke it in here. We really don't want a problem." So now Tik Tok wants to beat his ass. We had to stop him like 3 or 4 times from going next door. So one day, I guess his nicotine fit kicked in and he got so mad, he got up and he went next door into Vice. Well, Tom Jones isn't working and he starts asking around, "Where's his desk? Where's his desk?" Grabs his IBM typewriter, opens the window and throws it out the window into the back of PSA 7. Tom Jones comes in, "Where's my typewriter?" They tell him it's another big to-do. So what winds up happening is they transfer Tik Tok out to Queens for a while. I think he eventually came back, but it was kind of like a small punishment. If memory serves correctly, he went out to Queens for a little while to calls for service. So it winds up happening, and there's another guy in my office that didn't have as much time as Tik Tok. Tik Tok had just hit his 20th anniversary, and my buddy was like in his 19th year. He got a hold of Tik Tok, and he goes, "When are you going to retire?" And he goes, "Well, I hadn't thought of that yet." And this guy was really looking out for him, and he basically he's like, "Look, you should really retire. You got your time in, you're married, you want to enjoy your life, and blah, 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 blah." And eventually he talked him into it. Like, Tik Tok had not put any thought into retiring after 20 years. And my buddy actually talked him into it, and Tik Tok retired. And I hope he's still alive, and I hope he's enjoying his life. So I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to my show. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Dublin, Ireland, Queens, New York, Jacksonville, Florida, Buffalo, New York, Dallas, Texas, Abbotsford, British Columbia. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram, VicFerrari50, if you'd like to be a guest on the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoyed the content, just go to my Amazon author page and type in my name, Vic, Ferrari Like the Car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free, including NYPD, Presumption and Dysfunction. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.